I thank you for the opportunity to be back in the pulpit on this anniversary day. When I began my ministry at Salem 42 years ago Friday, I came from a three-church parish in Washington County in Western Maryland, and I was coming to a congregation far younger than I had ever served before. I can't resist telling you. The congregation at Locust Grove celebrated their 175th anniversary last May. It was a delight to be with them again. The congregation in Bakersville will celebrate their 220th birthday next year. And the congregation in Sharpsburg last year celebrated their 250th anniversary. So, just to keep you humble. But those were, I can't resist also saying, that wasn't the first that I was ever at Salem. I was here for Lutheran activities in the early 60s, and incredibly enough, just happening to visit us today is one of the kids that I knew from Salem, Tommy Brzezinski, in those Lutheran days. Well, this is the day, too, that the Lord has made, and we rejoice, and we're glad in it. Grace to you and peace from God our Father and our Lord Jesus Christ. Our gospel this morning finds Jesus and the disciples in Jerusalem at the temple, surrounded by its beauty and splendor, and this day finds us in our temple at Salem. And on this anniversary day, perhaps more than most such days, we could be more mindful of the treasure that surrounds us in here. The masterful painting of the Ascension. Jesus is ascending to heaven that he might be everywhere and always, even here, even now. And these stained glass windows, some of them created like this Bethany window with Tiffany workmanship, the full strains of our wonderful Moeller organ and our choirs, the richness of the abundant and recently renewed mosaic tiles. This could be a day to stare from time to time and just take it all in. And that's what was happening that day at the temple. People were marveling at Herod's lavish expansion of the Second Temple. Mark and Matthew, telling the same story, acknowledge it was the disciples whom Jesus is overhearing. And can't you just picture those fishermen from the little towns of far-off Galilee gawking and blabbering like tourists there on the Temple Mount? Andrew jabbing his brother and asking how many slaves and oxen do you think it took them to drag those massive stones up here? And Nathaniel thinking, I gotta remember to tell the guys back in Cana about this. And Philip off somewhere looking for a postcard stand. It's easy to be enthralled by those places which are immense or dazzling, but sometimes it's a beautiful and meaningful place, but also a place that is so familiar to us and so filled with the events of our lives that it's able to capture our hearts. So here we are like the disciples, with Jesus in our midst, some of us caught in heartfelt pleasure in this place, our sanctuary of a 170-year-old congregation. I'm sure I'm not the only one for whom this has become a treasured and cherished place. Not grand on a world scale like Jerusalem's Second Temple, but it is, after all, your temple, your Salem, your home. Are there ever times when it's difficult for you to imagine what faith and life would be without Salem. And yet that day at the temple, after all the disciples gawking, it's quiet, really quiet, and the disciples realize Jesus is staring at them and not at the temple. And he says, "So you're impressed by this colossal achievement? Well, you needn't be. You shouldn't be. Don't you realize this magnificence is but a passing thing? And the time will come when these stones will tumble and not one will be left upon another." So often, in so many ways, he warned them not to trust in some passing thing, but in that which would last forever. In which case, it may appear that Jesus is speaking also to us. How long do you think it took Pastor Azendorf to find a date for the anniversary celebration for me to preach on a gospel that would seem to reprimand us for our attachment to this place? I picture the man at his desk in there, starting in January, looking at the last one, finally getting all the way to mid-November and coming up with this and finding a lesson at odds with our celebration. A few Sundays ago, the appointed psalm rang out, "How lovely is your dwelling place, O Lord of hosts." Would it have killed you to give me a lesson like that? Then I could have talked about the little church on the country lane that those immigrant farmers built, and how a half-century later they made the bold decision to move to Village Center and built this magnificent church, and how half again a century later they built the educational wing, and how 2 decades ago we accomplished a major renovation, and how across all those years this sanctuary has been embellished and refurbished even so recently, and you give me a gospel saying it doesn't really matter. But we know, of course, that that's true. As beautiful as all of this is, we know in the end, it doesn't matter. None of this, though, in any profound sense, is really what makes Salem a cherished home for us. We treasure Salem because in this sacred space there have been times when we have experienced here an intimacy with God and with one another that is authentic and extraordinary in our lives. Some of that is publicly obvious, like when we bring our children here for baptism, or a loved one for burial, or when we come after receiving a serious medical diagnosis, or after some major reversal in our life, or we return to worship after surgery. But sometimes it just beats in our own hearts, such as a wrestling with guilt or doubt, or some worry for our children, or fears for the health of our loved one or our own, or when we have anxiety for life's changes and challenges, or excitement for some new beginning in our life, or devastation for some loss. But even just beating in our own heart, we feel near and strengthened by the fellowship of those around us, of people who strive to bear each other's burdens and be lifted by each other's joys. In this community of faith, which becomes and has become our family of faith. Well, that's not always true. most of the time we spend here is pretty ordinary. But as we learn in all the rest of our life, especially as we grow older and wiser, that which is ordinary is very blessed. And then there are those times too when we are distracted, our minds drift, filled with a multitude of idle thoughts, and days when it seems from within and from without that there is such a glorious amount of distraction. But sometimes the energy of a spiritual reality breaks through. A line of a hymn, a certain moment at the communion rail, some insight from a sermon, a progression of chords on the organ, or the kindness of someone's hand clasp. And then the presence of God is alive for us, as is the fellowship of this family, and we are more ready than we were before for the challenges of the week to come, and strengthened to serve God in his world, graced with gifts beyond our own. Because unlike Vegas, what happens in Salem doesn't stay in Salem. It is poured out for the love of God's world. The gospel then takes this ominous turn, and Luke moves us to the interchange of Jesus and the disciples in a teaching about the last times. Each of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, has a passage about the end times and Jesus' warnings. We annually encounter those at the close of each church year and honestly don't focus on them so very much. But after all, Jesus also said that we can't possibly know the time. And the life that he urges us, commands us to live then is not different from the life which he commands us to live now. Many of you already know what Martin Luther is credited with saying when he was asked what he would do if he believed the world would end tomorrow. He said, if I knew the world would end tomorrow, I would still plant my apple tree today. Scholars can't find it in all of his writings, but it sounds like him, and it's good. And I find it fascinating to know that it arose and came to prominence in the confessing church during the darkest days of World War II. The confessing church was that portion of the Lutheran church which resisted and defied Hitler's takeover of Christianity. It was a call, even the darkest of times, to persevere in faith, to trust God and bear the fruits of Christian living. And indeed, in that day, the stones did tumble, with the devastation leaving much of Europe and Asia in rubble, the world awash in refugees, and almost unimaginably now, more than 75 million deaths worldwide. And as for Herod's temple, the stones tumbled just 20 years later after their conversation, when it was destroyed by the Romans along with much of Jerusalem. This too, I fully believe, is a time of great challenge for the church, for our nation, and for the world. Nations, the world over, our own, but not only our own, are turning within. Racism is on the rise, and global compassion, understanding, and cooperation are becoming politically incorrect. Jesus commands us to continue to trust and live our faith and know that whatever happens, the kingdom continues to grow among us. Forgive me for not saying more about that, but I want to use these few minutes of our anniversary to speak more of our life together. And I believe our life together at Salem does prepare us for such extraordinary as well as the ordinary days. So I thought this seemed like a day I could briefly mention some of those qualities in Salem, the traits of this congregation which I particularly prize. I give thanks that this congregation places a high value on harmony among its members, even as we make allowances for our differences. We can disagree, but animosity, unkindness, and rancor are not acceptable. I give thanks that this congregation is an agreeable blend of new and long-time members, and that newer members are welcomed into leadership. I'm grateful for our readiness to accept those new persons into our community, including, especially, those whose identity or circumstances may be outside the mainstream. I love our inclusion of the children, whether they're sitting in those little Sunday school chairs or coming down the hall or squirming in those pews or beside us at the communion rail. I give thanks for our hospitality to refugees, a passion all of my life. Our first sponsorship took place the year before I arrived, and since then we have sponsored, again, 5 families, and we are working with another family now. I'm glad for the prominence of the sacraments at our worship. It seems hard to imagine now that there was a time we did not commune every Sunday. I give thanks for the excellent music of this congregation and the way it draws on the gifts of so many of our members. I'm pleased that we value our oneness with the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America and provide leadership. Pastor Azendorf's extraordinary award last summer from the ELCA is surely testimony to that. But I also rejoice for the oneness which we feel with the church, which is larger than any one denomination or culture or age. I cherish the priority that we give to ministry beyond our congregation. For years now, Salem has contributed 20 to 25% of its general income to ministry beyond Salem. It's extraordinary among churches. And that was important enough to me that we didn't call a second pastor here until we were sure that we could do both. I give thanks that this congregation thrives with the devoted and capable ministry of its 2 pastors, for their visionary leadership, their effective preaching, and their attentive pastoral care. Personally, I'm grateful for my successor's gracious generosity in inviting Vicki and me, after our sojourn away, to return to Salem. And I give thanks, too, that you are here. You, whom I'm just beginning to know, meeting some of you today, and you who have been with me for so very long. Now, by no means is Salem a perfect congregation. I don't have to tell anybody here that. But these are faith values against which we continually measure ourselves and our life together. Every congregation has its gifts and troubles. Many or most of you have been nurtured in other congregations, and we give thanks for your faith formation there. before you came here. Many of you, for a variety of reasons, will one day leave here, and we pray that you will then soon find a new faith community in which to share your gifts and have your faith nourished. Not knowing what tomorrow will bring, we seek grace to live faithfully. Tomorrow and any day is a good day for planting apple trees, for living lives that bear fruit, fruit that matters, fruit that will last, as parishioners here have done for 170 years. I also cherish this about Salem. Our name, it's a word rooted in shalom, the wholeness and peace God promises us through his grace. And together we work seeking such peace. Many years ago, one of our members, greeting me after the service with eyes full of tears, explained, "In this place I have no walls." Our life together gives us a place and a time when we are free to be our real selves with God and with each other. And in that reality, and across the years, we will have occasion again and again to affirm each other, to forgive each other, to comfort and admonish each other, to encourage each other, and to love one another. Beloved, we don't know what's ahead. We surely don't know when the world will end. But we do know one day our world will end. I pray that we meet that day rich in the fellowship of Salem or some other family of faith, as finally we will be embraced in the fullness